If you are listening to this podcast, it means you're searching for someone who understands you, someone who gets you. You are yearning to be understood and to belong. Welcome to the Someone Gets Me podcast, where we help smart, talented, and sensitive people navigate an often insensitive world. I am Dianne A, your host. My roles as ambassador, author, speaker, and intuitive mentor for bright and talented people are woven into each episode. I have the experience and knowledge to educate and inspire, as I have been there and I understand your unique intensities, sensitivities, and challenges. Welcome. The fine line between excellence and perfectionism. Hi friends, it's Dianne, and today here on Someone Gets Me, we are going to talk about excellence and perfectionism. Because perfectionism is something that is discussed a lot in the gifted world and in the performance world. And there's a lot of topics and conversation and conjectures about where perfectionism comes from. And there's lots of kinds of perfectionism based on their origin. Like some perfectionism comes from fear of success, where we self-sabotage because if it's not going to be perfect, it's not good enough, so I won't do it at all, or I'll stall or sabotage somehow. Then there's other kinds of perfectionism. So I want to talk about just the impact, the reality of how to say, if you're a perfectionist or somebody is saying to you, don't be so perfectionistic, or you're bothering yourself with perfectionism, I want to teach you some ways to substitute that whole idea of being a perfectionist with seeking excellence. They are very different, excellence and perfectionism. But excellence is an up-leveling. Excellence is an advanced version. It's a higher understanding of performance than perfectionism is. So where perfectionism is very rigid, and you can get tipped over really easy, excellence is very, very pliable. So think about like snow skiing. And that's what I think about a lot when I think about this. Somebody who's perfectionistic gets at the top of the mountain and they have their skis on and their knees are very rigid and they stand very rigid and everything has to be perfect and they're rigid and they're tight. And they're not going to make it very far, because the person who's practicing excellence bends their knees and leans into the experience and can successfully navigate down the mountain. So somebody who's living from a place of excellence is continuously striving, but what they're striving for is a personal best. They are focused on growing and evolving and transforming and striving toward their personal best. Whereas somebody who's got perfectionism going on is striving for an ideal. Now, a lot of times that ideal isn't even real. This is the way it should be. Well, this is the way, whatever it should be, that word should automatically sets us up to not have realistic understanding of what we're doing. So it should be this way, it should be that way, may or may not be true. So a perfectionist person or somebody who is struggling with perfectionism is striving for an ideal of something that often is based in fantasy. It's a good idea maybe, but it's not based in what's realistic and what's happening. So there's a big difference. Both people in both scenarios are working toward a betterment or something forward thinking. But if I'm going to be a perfectionist person, or you're being a perfectionist person, you are going after something that's impossible to fulfill. So excellence is a better choice. So for somebody who's living in excellence, which is kind of what I try to do, and I teach my clients to do this, is to have striving toward a goal or something that we want to grow into, and understand that it's possible. Be realistic about whatever it is. I'm 4'11". I'm not going to like have this fantasy that I'm going to go out and play basketball. That's like goofy. It's not going to work, not in a competitive manner, right? So let's go after what is possible and what is realistic in the sense of what's within our realm and our ability and our interests. That's excellence. Perfectionism is somebody who has an impossible desire, and the desire is to be 100% perfect at something. Now, oldest children or only children have a little layer on top of that, that there's a belief oftentimes that there's no learning curve allowed, that I have to be perfect right out of the gate. And so a lot of people think they have to be perfect right out of the gate, and that's also not the case. So then we have the way people talk to themselves. And when you're living in a place of excellence, you say to yourselves things like, I would like this, or I want that, or I wish this would happen. There is an opening. I always say this or something better. Like, I understand that as bright as I am, as bright as you are, we might think we want something in a certain way, but the truth is there might be something better. So I always say I would like this or something better, and keep open to the possibility that there is something I can't yet see, or something that is even a better option. Whereas on the other side of the coin here, our perfectionistic self is like, I must do it this way, or ought to be this way, or we should do this way. And there's that inner badgering and beating up of it. If it doesn't follow this particular thing, then somehow it's not good enough. I'm not good enough. It's not measuring up. And then that can create some self-sabotaging behavior and some just upset and generally malaise and not being happy. And so when we're striving for excellence, we're open to possibilities, which allows us the freedom of our mind and our emotions to then see solution and see opportunity that we wouldn't be able to see if we were all closed down with, this is the only way it should be. This is how it ought to be. I must. I hear it all the time. And we want to be a lot more kind with ourselves. The perfectionist person, I guess you could say it this way, they're always demanding themselves, or being very, very demanding and authoritarian, and in their own faces, so to speak. Where somebody's living with excellence is more requesting and focusing on a desire and excuse me, looking for the bigger picture and how it is going to work for them. So that the request, or focusing on your desire as a person who's excellent and living in excellence, has much more fluidity and permission and compassion and reliability in it, versus somebody who's always demanding. So when I go to work with somebody, or somebody calls me and they want to start working with me and they're very demanding, and there's a lot of must and should and ought and those kinds of things in their language, what they're telling me is there's a deeper fear of success, a deeper fear of not measuring up, or maybe a fear of losing what they have or not getting what they want. Something is underneath that is creating this rigidity and this inner strife that is coming out in a way that makes things impossible. Because the motivation for somebody who's living in excellence and somebody who's living in perfectionism is different. A person who is living in excellence is striving in a positive way. They're growing forward in a way that is bringing goodness. There's a level of success. I call it being a beneficial presence in whatever way that is. And it's the focus of that person's mind, of their actions, of the way they process things. A perfectionistic person is always demanding of themselves. And so actually their motivation is to avoid that very demand that they're doing. So they have a fear of failure and a fear of success happening at the same time. And I don't want to mess up, so I'm not going to fail, but I'm also afraid to succeed because I don't know if I want that responsibility. So I'm going to keep myself in this position of demanding and then avoiding the demand. So it creates a catch-22, a real pickle, if you will, for the people who are living with perfectionism. And perfectionism is very common in people who are gifted, or people who have high ideas or missions. They know they have a lot of things to do, but they aren't really sure about it, right? So they can get in that perfectionistic role. And so we want to shift it. We want to shift to excellence, where we're striving using the positive. We're striving using what we desire, what we want to see moving forward, where we're looking to be a beneficial presence. Hear even the difference in my voice when I use those words. It's much more effective to dance in the flow of our lives and say, how can I be a beneficial presence? How can I achieve my desire to be what I'm meant to be? Versus yelling at yourself and demanding how things ought to be in an impossible manner. You know, we get much more accomplished when we work with our own system than when we're yelling and demanding of ourselves. Now, the focus you want to have when you're living in excellence is one of the process. Like, what do I have to do? In fact, I was just working with a client a few minutes before recording this, and that's what we were talking about, the process and the fundamentals of putting together what it is that this person's working on. Versus a perfectionistic person is looking at the product. They're looking at the end result, or what they think the end result is. Because the truth is, there is no finish line. There is no end result. There might be a result that's the next part of the process, and that's the end of that part of the process or the end of that chapter, but it's not the end. And so we want to come out of looking for the product, for the end result, for all of that, and we want to really embrace process. We want to be free to live in that pursuit of that process and continuously elevating in a beneficial way who we are and how we operate. Versus when we're living in perfectionism, we're actually create a form of slavery for ourselves. We create a time where we feel like we're in prison, and the imprisonment is our belief around it has to be perfect. That's that part of striving for the ideal, that it has to be this way. I must do it this way. And we can build a box that's so rigid that we actually enslave ourselves. And we don't want that. You know, I think universally we understand that slavery is not a high ideal. It's not a goal, right? And so we don't want to keep creating slavery for ourselves of our own making by creating a prison of this is how it has to be, this must, ought, demanding way of being on our internal world. So if your inner language, if your self-talk is full of perfectionistic language and you haven't grown into a place of excellence yet, then you're enslaving yourself. And that is not the goal. The goal is to be free to pursue what it is your heart's desires, pursue your passions, pursue what you know you are here to do. That's the goal. So when I'm living in my excellence and I'm pursuing my goals, I expect myself to do the best I can with what I have in the moment, right? Like Maya Angelou said something to the effect of, when you know better, you do better, right? When we know better, we're supposed to do better. So as we grow and evolve and we pursue excellence, our best self keeps showing up. Now, if we're always growing and pursuing excellence, my best self today is going to be different than my best self was, a year ago or 6 months ago. That's also going to be different than my best self will be even next week. So we're always continuously growing in a realistic way, looking at the possibilities, striving for success, but yet understanding that we are free in this pursuit of being a beneficial presence. And we focus on being our best selves. When we slip into that lower way of doing things as a perfectionist, we are comparing ourselves to everyone else. We get in the comparison game, which 99% of the time doesn't work well, right? It doesn't work very well to do that. What works better is to compare ourselves to ourselves, right? We want to be our best self possible. And so there's a Buddhist phrase that is, when a lotus and a rose are next to each other, is one more beautiful than the other. So when we start comparing ourselves to others, especially neurodivergent gifted people and intensely sensitive people, my intuition comes through different than yours. My sensitivities are different than yours. Comparing me to you or you to somebody else you know or any people, that comparison gets us in trouble because then pretty soon we're distracted by something outside of us that is not helping us get where we want to go. So whenever you hear yourself doing that, whenever you hear yourself comparing yourself to someone else, it's important to say, whoa, 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 hold on a minute here. How am I comparing me to me in my own unique, interesting, cool way? Because somebody living in excellence sees life as this beautiful challenge, this beautiful experience that's welcomed. Like, I love getting up every day and seeing what cool thing I'm going to learn, what great people am I going to have a chance to talk to, what's going to happen. There's a sense of excitement in the air, and there's a challenge in it. It's fun. There's things to do. It's not always easy and it's not always great, but there's always something to get out of it. The person who's living in perfectionism basically sees life as a curse and it's kind of dreaded, like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. So the difference is, if you're a perfectionistic place, you're coming from it as, oh my God, I don't want to get up in the morning, and then the person who's living excellence is like, oh, I'm so happy to be up in the morning. It's the same getting up in the morning. It's just our attitude. It's our way of looking at it. And so I never try to call a person a perfectionist or anything. What I like to try to do is say, when we go slip down into that lower vibration, into that lower way of letting fear run us and covering it up with perfectionism or covering it up with pride, that can remind us. That's a trigger. That reminds us there's a higher, better way. There's another way to welcome our life and welcome experience and welcome what's happening instead of dreading it. Because the results then are very different. When we slip into that lower perfectionistic way of living, we often are disappointed. And sometimes there's a lot more frustration than we would like. And we might even perceive failure where maybe there isn't even failure because we're going after an ideal that's not real anyway. So if we're going after an ideal that's not real anyway, because it's made up in our mind, then we might perceive that we're failing at something we're actually succeeding at. It gets us all stuck. But when we're living in a place of excellence where we've raised our understanding and we're choosing a more positive, a more personally rewarding way of living, a free way of living, we focus more on accomplishment rather than disappointment. We focus on being accepting and acceptance of our life, our world, what's happening, how we're feeling, rather than condemning things. We have a sense of fulfillment that we are living our personal best to the best of our ability, and that we welcome opportunities in life even when they're challenging. We don't walk around all frustrated and irritated and having road rage and yelling at people and all stressed out. And above all, we walk around feeling a sense of success. Because for me, the definition of success is I learned something. I'm learning and gaining and growing, versus a sense of failure, thinking, oh, I cannot do it, right? Things aren't working out for me. So there's a lot of benefit on many levels to living from a place of excellence with a mindset of I'm growing in excellence. I'm not going to be a prisoner to being a perfectionist, to some fantasy ideal that may or may not even really be real. So we have our spiritual self, our mental self, our emotional self, our social self, right? We have all the parts of us that when we're grounded in reality, or we're grounded in the world in all the different aspects, that living in a place of excellence gives us freedom and allows us to see our accomplishments and to be the beneficial presence that our heart's desire is. It's your heart's desire because it benefits you and others. So when we focus on excellence and growing into more and more of our personal best, we get to live that beneficial presence. That heart's desire gets to come true. So then the truth becomes that people and things that we engage with and on ourselves don't have to be always perfect and don't always have to be this perfectly scripted way where it's this way or no way. There is freedom and there is movement and there is acceptance along the way, knowing that the universe is always expanding. Things are always changing and moving and growing, and that's the point. So when we get stuck in this perfectionistic part, everything has to be a certain way. That's often based on a fantasy. It's based on an idea of what we think it should be. Whether that's real or not, or even appropriate or not, is usually up for discussion. So I like us all to believe for a moment and see for a moment that when we up level or we raise our way of approaching the world and we take down that badge of honor, like I have a client who goes, I'm a perfectionist, and he was bragging about it. And I said, well, tell me the benefit of being a perfectionist. And he went on and on and on about his stress and how he feels like a prisoner to this fear he's got and all those things. I said, so what's the benefit again? Right. And he just looked at me funny. And I'm like, so there, we've been taught how to brag about something or label ourselves as something that actually works against us. So next time you get ready to call yourself a perfectionist or brag about being a perfectionist, why don't you change it into something really amazing like, I like to be in the pursuit of excellence. It works for me to pay attention to being my best self each day, whatever that looks like. It works for me to be focused on the challenges and the beauty of the world, and I get to strive for things that are positive versus demanding and yelling at yourself and seeing things as dreaded, the world as dreaded. Because I think it's important. I've had to work through a lot of these things myself, and I have clients I'm working with right now who are working on this very topic. Is what's realistic and what is not realistic for us to be working on, right? As gifted people, as people in the business world or not in the business world, right? How do we do it? How do we live from excellence versus perfectionism? I work with some corporate teams, and there are some people on the team who brag about being a perfectionist, and that actually holds the team back because of the rigidity and the limited view and ultimately that person's fear, though they're going to deny the fear some of the time, but that imprisonment to that fear holds the whole group back. And so when we relax our grip and we don't have ourselves, gripped by the throat, and we relax that feeling of dread and disappointment, we are able then to move into striving for something more positive, more useful, more accepting, right? That works with our world versus holding it back out of fear. So a lot of the people who are working on this particular team I'm thinking about that are the perfectionistic ones, they see it somehow as noble to try to do everything perfectly. Well, as Wayne Dyer said in one of his movies, he said, what was true in the morning of your life may prove to be untrue in the evening of your life. That we are always growing in unity, diversity, complexity. There's always expansion happening. So the moment we hold on to an ideal that has perfectionism around it, we are imprisoning ourselves and actually moving backwards. And so once the people who were doing that in this group, when I, helped them see that way of being wasn't serving the larger group, and then understood how when everybody goes after excellence and we're all working toward our personal best and it's genuine and it's real, that then the whole group is elevated. Then my job becomes to be the translator between all the different ways of doing things. And so as the intuitive executive mentor that I am, I get to really see teams achieve more in a satisfactory, happy, empowering way with each person in their own sovereignty versus a lot of fear pushing and demanding and nobody really very happy. So there is a way for us to be successful, for us to be happy, for all people in a group, whether it's a family or a work team or whatever, to free ourselves from that enslavement and that prison that things have to be a certain way all the time or else. Now, this does not mean that it's okay to be sloppy, and it does not mean that that there are some things we don't need to have precision with, because gifted people love to have things to be correct. But that's why I'm talking about the pursuit of the excellence of personal best. So the excellence is actually a higher accountability, because the fear gets replaced with desire and care. So we end up with a more effective, higher, amazing result. So there you have it, right? Which are you going to pick? So instead of seeing yourself as one or the other, notice when you're being rigid and you're being controlling and you're beating yourself up in your head, go, ooh, I'm being a perfectionism person, and that's not going to work because I'll be disappointed. So what are you going to do? You're going to shift over and say, okay, I'm going to work on excellence. I'm going to have a genuine striving for my own personal best. That's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to release the addiction to comparison. I'm going to release the fear of failure and the fear of success. And I'm going to work toward my personal best in whatever the event or project or whatever it is, and see and feel a different result. You will see it. You will feel it. You will notice that you will be much more approachable. You won't be stressed out as much either. You'll be able to sleep better. And believe it or not, your results will be much better, because you will be working with the world, with your inner self, with the universe, rather than against it. So my friends, there's a fine line between excellence and perfectionism. But that line can work in our favor. When we step over it into perfectionism, we can just as quickly step back over the line again the other way to be in excellence where we belong. As always, if you have any questions or comments and you want to give me a call, or you want to set up a get to know you call, please do that. Those links are on the show notes. But in the meantime, keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you're a rock star. You're here on purpose with a mighty purpose. So go out there, practice excellence in your daily life, and then let me know. Let me know how it goes. Until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, this is Dianne saying, be well. Are you tired of searching for someone to understand you? Join our Facebook group, Someone Gets Me. In this group, you will be able to connect with others who are intense, sensitive, smart, and talented. I share my insights and teachings, and you can connect with others in a real, authentic, safe forum. So join us today. Someone Gets Me.